Good morning. So in the work that I do with teams, I end up traveling a lot. And a couple weeks ago, I had a layover in the Atlanta airport. And I sat down at my gate, and next to me, there was a newspaper that someone else had left behind. And I pick up the newspaper, and I'm looking through it, and I see this article that says, "Millions of ideas born and killed every day." And I start reading this article, I'm getting really sucked in, and I realize it's about life and death. It's about survival. And it was about how we have these ideas all the time, and we kill them. Because, individuals, teams, organizations, all these issues, we kill these ideas. So that made me start thinking about my own experiences where I've seen ideas die. A couple decades ago, my first kind of real job, the one where you get benefits. So I'm in my first job, and we have a staff meeting one day, and one of my colleagues says, "Hey, I have this issue, and I'm wondering, could we just brainstorm a minute? I'd love to get some ideas from you all." Okay, I sit up straight. I'm like, "Yeah, I'm in." So she lays out the problem, and idea number one comes in, idea number two, a third person shares an idea, fourth idea, and then this other colleague, we'll call him Phil, Phil says, "Oh no, we can't do that. We did that in 1985 and it was a complete disaster." And y'all, I just bust out laughing. And then I got the look and realized he wasn't joking. He was serious. And I was like, wow, really? 1985 was a long time ago. Things might have changed a little bit. Needless to say, Phil was a little bit jaded. But what was more surprising to me was not that moment, but what happened about 6 months later. So, summertime, Phil invites the staff over to his house to have like a little potluck. And I saw this completely different side of Phil. His wife was there, his 10-year-old son was there, he's relaxed. I find out he's really into theater, he plays music a little bit. I'm like, what? This is the same guy that was like shooting down some idea? And that experience really made me think about what's going on. Why is it that sometimes teams make people less creative? What happens when Phil walks through that building every weekday and he leaves his creativity at home? And the thing with creativity is it's in us, right? Like it's in our DNA. I mean, just look the last, thousands of years of human evolution and all these things we've made that we create all the time. That's how we're here today in this building with a concrete floor and fancy video equipment, right? But even though that creativity is in us, it's not like breathing. Breathing we don't think about, right? Like imagine if we had to think about breathing every day. It'd be kind of a small disaster, especially given what we know about multitasking, that it doesn't work. We wouldn't get anything done. So breathing is automatic, but creativity isn't. And I think that's where some confusion comes in. If we think, oh, well, if we're just naturally creative, then it should be as easy as breathing. But it's not. It doesn't actually work that way. If you want to be creative, you have to be deliberate. You have to be intentional about it. So think about someone you know who's highly creative, somebody that you personally know. Now imagine interviewing them and talking to them about what they do on a regular basis. Chances are they'll tell you various things that they do to increase that creativity and stay creative in their life. They might not even be aware of it. It might be something as simple as they carry a notebook around that they jot down ideas, or that they draw a doodle every single day. Whatever it is, they're doing something deliberate to foster that creativity. So the last few years I've been researching creativity, And one of my research heroes is a professor named Dr. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And you might know him from his work on flow. I see some head nods out there. So flow is this state that, I'm sure you've all experienced this, where you get so engrossed in something, just time slips away. You forget to eat, you forget to pick your kids up from soccer practice, you're just so into whatever you're doing. And so Dr. Csikszentmihalyi discovered this state that we go into when he was researching creativity. So he did this other study in the 1990s where he wanted to see what are the commonalities that creative people have, like highly creative people. So he selected about 100 people from a variety of fields who he decided were highly creative. Well, I shouldn't say he decided. This was determined by the field. So for instance, people that had won Nobel Prizes or other like top medals or top awards in their field. Literature, art, physics, math, kind of running the gamut. So he invites these people to come in and to interview each of them. One of the criteria to be in the study was that you had to be at least 60 years old. Now, I was like, well, that's kind of old. Sorry, no offense. This is a long time ago when I read this. Yeah, I was a lot younger. No gray hair at the time. But the reason Csikszentmihalyi made that decision is because it really takes a lifetime to develop your creativity and to get to that level, which is good news, right? For most of us. Actually, it's good news for any of us, right? Because we can always work on that. So the other thing that came up in that study as he was interviewing these people, and they were, 3 to 4 hour interviews, like pretty in depth, almost all the people in the study talked about their team. They talked about the people that they work with, that they collaborate with. They talked about like where they get ideas from talking with other people. And they almost like deflected the praise or like, oh, no, it's not me, it's my team. And the thing with teams they're complex, right? Because us people are complex. And teams can be amazing. They can be like super creative. And they could also be like my experience with Phil, where, a few ideas get shut down all the time. But teams are the #1 source of innovation in organizations. So if you can capture that creativity within a team, the potential is way higher than it would be individually. So I want you to think about a team that you've been on at some point, either you're on now or you've been on in the past, where collectively you were trying to be more creative together. Now, let me explain what I mean by team. So, I think my favorite definition of teams comes from the book, The Wisdom of Teams by Katzenbach and Smith. And they say that teams are a small group of people committed to a common purpose, performance goals, and approach for which they hold themselves mutually accountable. I heard a wow over here. Yeah, so when I read that definition, I thought the same thing. I thought, wow, that's really aspirational. Chances are your team is not meeting all those criteria, but I think of the question really is, are they striving to? Is your team kind of trying to head in that direction? And that's what I think is ideal. Now, a team might be a project that you're working on. You come together maybe for a short amount of time, a few months, could be a year, you're working on a project together. It could be perhaps you own a small business and there's a few people that work together in that business, 3, 4, or 5 people, that could be a team. CreativeMornings, the group that puts on this event, that would be a team. If you say you're a freelance graphic designer, you work by yourself, but you get hired by a client, and you're essentially collaborating with them, and you're working together to create whatever it is they ask you to create, that's a team. So in case that definition helps, and those examples, think again about a team that you've been on where you were at least trying to be creative. Now in a moment, I'm gonna incite some chaos in here and ask you all to stand up. And on the center table as well as the back tables, there are some cards that look like this. They're called Climer cards. And you'll see about 50 different pictures. And in a moment, I'll ask you to stand up, select an image that is a symbol or a metaphor for what that experience of that team was like. Okay, it could have been that it was more like my experience with Phil, or it was a more amazing experience. Whatever it was, you're going to select a card that's a symbol or metaphor of that experience, and then pair up with someone. It's a great opportunity to meet someone new, introduce yourself, and share with them the card you chose and why you chose it, and just give them about a 1-minute story. So I'm going to give you about 2-3 minutes to have this conversation, and then you can take your card and head back to your seat. Sound good? All right, go for it. All right, welcome back. So I'm curious, how many of you talked about a situation where your team was more creative than you might have been individually? Raise your hand. Okay, maybe, keep your hands up. Okay, maybe just really a handful, 20 people, maybe a quarter of the room. All right, how many people talked about a situation where your team was less creative than they might have been individually? Okay, about the same actually. It's pretty even. And then a bunch of people didn't raise their hand. What's wrong with y'all? No, just kidding. So teams are powerful. They hold the power of essentially helping an idea to survive or killing the idea. One of the things that I found in my research is that if teams are to be creative together, there's 3 elements that they need in order to collaboratively create. So I want to talk through those 3 and keep thinking about that team that you talked about and see how these elements fit for that team. So the first is they need to have a clear shared purpose. Okay, that might seem obvious. The team needs to know, why are we a team? What are we doing together? But you know, it's actually not always that obvious. A couple years ago, I was working with a client, and it was an executive team of about a medium-sized company, maybe 100 people, 100 employees. And I asked them, I said, what is the purpose of this team? What's your purpose? And they kind of looked at each other, looked at me, and finally one of them said, well, do you mean like our mission statement? I said, well, no, that's like the purpose of the organization, of your company, but what is this team doing? What's your purpose? And they couldn't answer the question. Needless to say, we had a lot of work to do. But it's not always obvious, even though we think it should be. But having that clear shared purpose is important. And I say shared purpose. So it's not this purpose that the CEO comes down and says, okay, y'all are going to form a team to do this project. You're good. That's a piece of it. But then the team needs to take that directive and own it and form it. You know, what is this like? How do we get it aligned to this? And they need to be motivated and committed to that purpose. So that's number 1, having a clear shared purpose. Number 2, the second element that teams need if they're going to collaboratively be creative is they need to have strong team dynamics. So this means that we need to trust each other. And by trust, I mean that I can throw an idea out on the table, and I'm not going to get yelled at like Phil yelled. Like, it's not going to get shot down in an instant. That I trust my team enough that I can be myself, that I can bring my whole self to work and I can be real, and I can be vulnerable essentially, right? So there needs to be an element of trust. Teams need to be able to communicate well. Okay, no surprise there, right? And the third is that teams need to be able to engage in creative abrasion. And creative abrasion means we can have conflict around ideas and how we work together and what we're going to do together, but we're not having conflict because of personality or identity. And that conflict that we have around ideas is with the end goal to make things better, right? And to help whatever that end product is. So that's the purpose of any debate or any discourse. Does that make sense? Okay, so having strong team dynamics is the second one. The third thing is teams need to use and follow a creative process. So creative process, the one that's most popular today that we hear about is design thinking, or human-centered design. Creative problem solving is another one. but there needs to be some process that you're following to help you be creative together. Now, it doesn't have to have a name. It doesn't have to be, one of the ones that are, people have written about, but some way, some methodology that you all are being creative together. And there's a variety of tools and techniques that you can use to help enhance that creativity. So in my research, I created an assessment tool that measures those 3 elements of creativity within a team. And one of the things I found is that most teams are lacking in the creative process area. I see some head nods of like, yep, that makes sense. And if you think about it, we're taught, the purpose, I don't think anyone was too shocked when I said a team needs a clear purpose. And team dynamics, we are talking about that now. This is part of our national lexicon. In middle school, you're talking about communication, even elementary school. But we don't talk about creativity and creative process in the same way. And so most people don't understand that. But when you understand it, it's going back to that breathing. It helps us move what's in our DNA. It helps us actually bring that to reality if we can follow this creative process. And the creative process is based on our natural human behavior and what we do. So I want to leave you with a challenge. Think about the teams that you're on or that you might be on in the near future, and think about where are those gaps. Do you have a gap in purpose, dynamics, or process, or maybe all 3? And think about what can you do to help close that gap. How can you become more clear with your team about your purpose? How can you build that trust and have appropriate creative abrasion? What type of process can you follow to become more creative together? So that's my challenge to you, because I believe, and this is all backed by research, that creative teams are amazing and they can change the world. So good luck. Thanks, y'all.